This section is reserved, can't you read? Or do your kind just take whatever you want? Get out now. The voice of Chad Davenport, a 28-year-old trust fund parasite whose entire personality was a cocktail of unearned arrogance and expensive cologne, cut through the low, sophisticated thrum of the restaurant. He didn't just speak, he barked. He shoved me, Marcus, hard on the shoulder. The shove was weak, pathetic, but the intent was to humiliate. I didn't move an inch from my seat, but the papers in my hand rustled. I was seated at table 7, the premier VIP booth at Meridian, the city's most exclusive velvetrope dining establishment. Before this goes any further, I need to know what part of the world you're watching from. Comment your city and the time right now. I was here in this temple of gastronomy, wearing a simple, faded black hoodie, worn jeans, and a 3-day-old beard. I was, by their standards, an anomaly. A piece of trash that had somehow slipped through the cracks and soiled their perfect, curated world. Looming beside Chad, already filming the entire confrontation with a jewel-encrusted smartphone, was his girlfriend, Tiffany. She was a vapid, surgically enhanced creature of Instagram, decked out in loud, ostentatious designer labels that screamed new money. She pressed her phone closer to my face, the LED light blinding, her voice a high-pitched, mocking vocal fry for her 50,000 live stream followers. OMG, you guys, you will not believe this. This random hobo has apparently camped out at our table. The audacity is everything. The hostess, a complicit woman named Sarah with a smile as fake and cold as the ice in her water glass, hovered behind them. She had, in fact, seated me here just 15 minutes ago as per my reservation. But now, faced with Chad, a notoriously abusive but obscenely high-tipping, platinum member, she had chosen her side. She had, in essence, double-booked the table, intending to use him as the muscle to eject me, the problem, so she wouldn't have to. I saw the small, cruel smirk on her face as Chad escalated. This wasn't an accident, it was an execution. I'm sorry, Chad mocked in a high-pitched, squeaky voice. I have a reservation. Is that what you were gonna say, buddy? He played to Tiffany's camera, then in a single vicious motion he snatched the thick stack of papers from my hand. He held them up, squinting at the dense lines of data. What is this, huh? Your welfare application, your eviction notice. This is my table, you street trash. And then he ripped them. He tore the thick 40-page document in half. The sound of the paper tearing was shockingly loud in the hushed restaurant. The shredded pieces fluttered to the pristine marble floor. Tiffany, in a final, visceral act of classist dominance, stepped forward and ground the shredded documents under her red-bottomed stiletto heel, twisting her foot, a deliberate, cruel act of vandalism. Oopsie, she sneered into her camera. Look at that, all his important hobo papers. This is just too much. Someone call security, he's littering. Chad and Tiffany, in their blinding, suffocating arrogance, saw a hobo. They saw street trash. They saw a nobody who had wandered out of his lane, a systemic error to be corrected. They had no idea who they were shoving. They had no idea whose property they had just destroyed. They had no idea they were shoving me, Marcus Vance, the new and very, very invisible owner of the entire 300-location Meridian Restaurant Group, LLC. They didn't just know the owner. They were, at this very moment, assaulting him on a live stream. I wasn't just at the restaurant, I owned the restaurant. I owned the building. I owned the block. I had finalized the $1.4 billion hostile takeover of the entire restaurant group 72 hours ago, and I was here in this hoodie in this disguise for a very specific reason. This flagship location, the jewel in their crown, was bleeding money. The books were cooked. The official reports from the general manager, a man named David, were pure fiction. The inventory loss, the shrinkage, was at an astronomical 40%, a number that screamed felony-level theft. I was here in person to conduct a covert operational audit. I was here to prove what I already suspected, that the entire senior staff, from the GM David to the hostess Sarah, were racist, corrupt, and were giving away tens of thousands of dollars a month in free food, high-end liquor, and comped VIP services to their wealthy, abusive friends like Chad. And the papers, the welfare application that Chad had just ripped to shreds and Tiffany had ground into the marble, that was my evidence. That was my 40-page fraud and inventory loss audit report. That was the only copy. It contained the proof, the doctored inventory logs, the discrepancies in the reservation system, the list of platinum members who had eaten here 50 times and never once paid a bill. It was the receipt, the smoking gun, the documented proof of felony theft, wire fraud, and conspiracy that I was planning to use to fire the entire management team on Monday. Chad Davenport, in his pathetic attempt to play the big man, hadn't just assaulted a customer. He had assaulted the one man who signs the paychecks for every single person in this building. He had, in his arrogance, just physically destroyed the federal indictment I was building against the corrupt staff. He thought he was just a bully. He had no idea he had just, in one idiotic, alcohol-fueled moment, made himself an accessory to a multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. He didn't just make a mistake. He just gave the new owner all the probable cause he'd ever need. He gave me a reason to not just fire them but to arrest them. He just made the worst, the most expensive, and the very last mistake of his entire, pathetic, trust fund-fueled career. The general manager, a man named David, glided over. He didn't walk, he glided, a predator in a $2,000 Italian suit, his shoes silent on the marble. His face was a mask of practiced, professional concern, but his eyes were cold. He was the king of this little kingdom. The man I suspected was the ringleader of the entire inventory loss and fraud scheme. He, of course, had no idea who I was. He saw exactly what he was programmed to see. His high value, platinum bully Chad and a problem, me, disrupting the evening's profits. He completely ignored me. He didn't even look at the shredded pieces of my multi-million-dollar audit report, now a pathetic, soggy pile of pulp dissolving in spilled champagne on the floor. He focused entirely on the villain. This was the competitor system in action, the corrupt staff protecting their high-tipping, complicit clientele. The hostess, Sarah, hovered at his elbow, a co-conspirator, her face a perfect mask of, "Oh, this is all so terrible," while her eyes danced with the malicious thrill of it all. "Mr. Davenport," David said, his voice a low, respectful purr. "I am so sorry for this." Interruption. What seems to be the problem? He gave Chad the platform. He gave him the stage. This was the villain's trap, and Chad, arrogant and drunk on his own power, walked right into it, eager to perform. "The problem, David," Chad said, huffing with indignation as he lounged back on my banquette, "is that your standards are slipping. You're letting trash like this just wander in." He gestured to me as if I were a stray dog that had defecated on his lawn. "This guy just sat down at my table. He refused to move when I told him to. And then," he lied, his voice rising, "he got aggressive. He started threatening us, said he was going to sue. He was unstable." Honestly, I was worried for Tiffany's safety. Tiffany, on cue, shrunk against him, her phone never wavering, her "OMG, I'm so scared" expression perfectly framed for her 50,000 followers. It was a beautiful performance, a duet of deceit. The hostess, Sarah, chimed in, her voice trembling with fake fear. He was David. He was very menacing. He had all these papers, and he just wouldn't leave when I told him the table was reserved." She, of course, neglected to mention that she had seated me and that the reservation was mine. David, the GM, finally turned his cold, reptilian gaze on me. His face, which had been so full of concern for Chad, was now a mask of cold, professional disgust. "Sir," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this table is reserved for our platinum members." "I have a reservation," I said, my voice quiet, my heart rate steady. I was gathering data. "That's impossible," David lied, without even checking. "This table is held nightly for Mr. Davenport. Now I'm going to have to ask you to leave." "I'm not leaving," I said. "I'm at my reserved table." David sighed, a put-upon theatrical sound. He was now performing for the other diners who were all watching, phones out. "Sir," he said, his voice rising just enough to carry, "we have a dress code." Ah, there it was, the classic bulletproof excuse. I looked down at my simple black hoodie, my worn jeans. Then I looked at Chad, who was wearing a garish, unbuttoned silk shirt that looked like a 90s casino carpet. "A dress code?" I asked. "We can't have people loitering in our VIP section," David said, the trigger words coming fast now. It's harassing our clientele. This gentleman," he gestured to Chad, who beamed, "is a valued patron. You, on the other hand, are now officially trespassing." He had just, in a room full of witnesses, created his legal justification. He had escalated my presence from customer to trespasser. He continued, his voice now a public proclamation. "I know your type. You come in, you find a problem, you make a loud, public scene, and you hope we'll comp your meal to make you go away. You're playing the victim card, but you were the one who caused the disturbance. This is a private establishment. We have the right to refuse service to anyone." He had just quoted the law, or his twisted, racist interpretation of it. He believed he was on solid ground. He believed he was in control. He had the money, Chad, the complicit staff, Sarah, and the law, his right to refuse service, all on his side. He had built his fortress. And then he delivered his peak arrogance. He nodded, a sharp, decisive gesture, to the two large, suit-clad security guards who had been silently moving into position, flanking me. "Gentlemen," David said, his voice booming with the finality of a gavel strike, "please escort this individual out of the building. He is trespassing. And Sarah," he said, not even looking at her, "call the police. I want him charged, trespassing and harassment. I want a report filed." He had just done it. He had just ordered the new owner of his $1.4 billion company to be arrested in his own flagship establishment. He had just ordered the hobo in the hoodie to be charged with a crime. And the entire time, Tiffany's camera was live, streaming his every single career-ending and deeply illegal word to the entire waiting and watching world. He had no idea. He couldn't possibly know. He thought he was just taking out the trash. He had no idea he was signing his own death warrant. The two security guards, massive men in ill-fitting black suits, moved to grab my arms. They were the physical manifestation of David's verdict, the final step in my public execution. One guard, a thick-necked brute, reached for my left bicep, his partner circling to flank me. In their minds, this was a simple trash removal, a non-event, the kind of thing they did twice a night. Chad was smirking, his victory complete. Tiffany's camera was zoomed in tight on my face, waiting to capture the moment of my struggle, my humiliation, my ultimate defeat. The entire restaurant was a silent, Colosseum-like audience, hungry for the kill. This was the moment, the code switch. I, who had been calm, silent, and observant, a passive hobo, finally spoke. My language, my tone, my entire presence transformed. I didn't shout, I didn't plead. I spoke, and my voice was not the quiet, defeated mumble of a nobody. It was a voice that was cold, articulate, and echoed with the absolute, unshakable authority of a man who owns boardrooms, not a man who cleans them. "Stop it." The word was not loud, but it was so charged with command that it physically stopped the guards. Their hands froze inches from my hoodie. They were trained to respond to aggression, to fear, to resistance. They were not trained for this. This was different. "Touch me," I continued, my voice a flat, lethal monotone, my eyes locking on the first guard, "and you will add assault, battery, and unlawful imprisonment to your personal liability." I let the word personal hang in the air, a drop of pure acid. Our corporate insurance, as I'm sure you're aware, does not cover employees who are acting outside the law by following an illegal order. You are, at this moment, acting as David's personal thugs, not as employees of this establishment. Back away. Now, the technical deconstruction had begun. The guards froze, their faces a mask of sudden, profound confusion. This was not the language of a hobo. This was the language of a lawyer. They looked at David, their manager, for guidance, but David was just as stunned. "Who the hell do you think you are?" David scoffed, trying to regain control, but his voice had a new, high-pitched, reedy quality. He was rattled. "You're threatening my staff." "I'm not threatening David," I said, turning my full, cold attention to him. "I'm informing you. You, as general manager, have just, in a room full of witnesses, authorized the assault of a patron who was peacefully seated at his confirmed reservation. In doing so, you have personally violated Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, as I'm sure you don't know, prohibits discrimination and the denial of full and equal enjoyment of public accommodations based on race, which, by the way, your hostess Sarah and your platinum guest Mr. Davenport have so thoughtfully provided the motive for. Your right to refuse service does not and has never protected you from this. David's face went white. This wasn't just a threat from a nobody. This was a specific, cited statute. That doesn't apply, David stammered, falling back on his only defense. I'm enforcing a dress code. A dress code? I almost laughed. A dress code that isn't posted anywhere in your lobby. A dress code that you just selectively enforced against a black man in a hoodie while ignoring him. I pointed to a white man at the bar, not 5 feet away, who was wearing a stained polo shirt and flip-flops. You're not enforcing a dress code, David. You're enforcing a race code. And a dress code, when applied selectively, is the legal definition of a pretext for racial discrimination. I nodded toward Tiffany, who was still, stupidly, filming. A fact that this young lady has been beautifully documenting, in high definition, for my legal team for the past 10 minutes. Thank you for that, by the way. Your contribution to the inevitable lawsuit is invaluable. Tiffany's phone wavered. The smile was gone. Chad, what's he talking about? What's Title II? She whispered. Chad, for the first time, looked uncertain. This was the receipt. I slowly reached into my hoodie pocket. The guards tensed. Chad actually flinched. I pulled out my phone. It wasn't an old, cracked iPhone. It was a brand new $2,000 top-of-the-line satellite phone, a device they probably didn't even recognize. Now, I said, holding up the phone, let's talk about this table, Table 7, my permanent standing reservation. David scoffed, his bravado returning. I told you that's impossible. We have no record. You're right, you don't, I said, because my reservation isn't in your little iPad. It's not an open table. I tapped the screen and the phone illuminated, showing a single black and gold custom icon. My reservation, I said, is on the Meridian Holdings private server and asset management app. This was the villain's realization. This was the kill shot. The name, Meridian Holdings. It was the new, secret corporate parent company, the one that had been rumored in hushed tones in management meetings, the invisible, faceless entity that had just acquired the entire chain. It was a name that no one outside of the C-suite and the legal department was supposed to know. It was a name that a hobo could not possibly know. David's blood didn't just run cold, it froze. His face went from pale to a ghastly greenish-white. The hostess, Sarah, let out a small, strangled gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She knew that name. She had seen it on the new letterhead. Tiffany finally lowered her phone. Chad, what's going on? Who is this guy? Chad was speechless. The hobo was speaking a language he didn't understand, but he knew, with the primal instinct of a cornered animal, that it was a language of power. The security guards, hearing the name and seeing their manager's catastrophic physical reaction, took 2 large, involuntary steps backward. They were no longer escorting me. They were retreating from me. The power dynamic of the entire room, of the entire universe, had just pivoted violently and irrevocably on that single, secret corporate name. David's face was a grotesque mask of dawning, abject terror. The name Meridian Holdings had shattered his composure, his arrogance, his entire professional reality. He was staring at me not as a hobo anymore, but as a ghost, an impossibility. Who are you? He stammered, his voice a reedy, choked whisper. Are you with corporate? Are you an auditor? He was scrambling, his mind trying to place me into a box he understood. An auditor was bad. But an auditor was still just an employee. Tiffany's phone was still in her hand, but it was lowered, no longer filming. Her 50,000-person audience was gone, replaced by the single, terrifying man in front of her. Chad, she whispered, her voice trembling. Chad, he knows the corporate name. I think we should go. Now. Chad, for his part, was frozen. He was a bully, and like all bullies, he was a coward. Faced with a power he didn't understand, his entire pathetic personality had short-circuited. He just sat there, mouth slightly open, his face pale and slick with a sudden cold sweat. This was the moment, the identity reveal, the thunderbolt. An auditor? I almost laughed. No, David, I'm not an auditor. I'm the man who hires the auditors. I'm the man who reads their reports. I took a slow, deliberate step toward him. The security guards who were still flanking me didn't retreat, but they didn't advance. They were trapped, their professional instincts screaming that I was the threat, but their newfound animal fear telling them to stay perfectly still. My name, I said, my voice cutting through the restaurant's horrified silence, is Marcus Vance, and as of 72 hours ago I am the 100% equity owner and CEO of Meridian Restaurant Group, LLC. I let the name hang in the air. Which includes, I continued, this building, this carpet, this $4,000 bottle of wine on the shelf behind you, this table. I gestured to the VIP booth. Your $2,000 suit, your salary, and the 2 goons you just ordered to unlawfully detain me. The systemic shock was instantaneous and catastrophic. It was a pressure wave that rolled through the entire restaurant. The hostess, Sarah, let out a small, strangled scream and physically collapsed against the reservation desk, her hand over her mouth. The 2 security guards took 2 large, involuntary steps backward, their faces going white. They weren't just retreating, they were recoiling. Tiffany's phone, the one that had documented her own downfall, clattered from her numb fingers onto the table. And Chad, who had been lounging like a king, sat bolt upright as if he'd been struck by lightning. He looked small. My apologies for the disturbance, folks, I said, pitching my voice to the rest of the dining room, to the dozens of patrons who were now all standing, their own phones capturing this new, even more dramatic second act. My name is Marcus Vance. I'm the new owner of this establishment. It appears we are having a severe management and clientele issue tonight. Please enjoy your meals. We will have this trash taken out shortly. I used his own word. I saw him flinch. David was shaking his head, a desperate, denying motion. No, that's impossible. The new owner, he's not you. He was trying to say, you're not white. He was trying to say, you're not me. I'm not what, David? I asked. My voice dangerously soft. I'm not what you expected. You expected a man in a suit like you. You expected a man who looks like him. I pointed to Chad. You just judged the owner of your company based on his hoodie. You just, in front of 30 witnesses and a live stream, proved exactly what I came here to find. You are incompetent. You are a racist. And as of this moment, you are unemployed. This was the suiting up. It wasn't physical. It was digital. It was total. You see, David, I said, I don't need to suit up to own you. I already do. I tapped my satellite phone. You all seem to be confused about who I am. Let's clear that up. I tapped my phone again. The massive 80-inch smart TV above the bar, which had been showing a silent black and white art film, flickered. It went blue. Then it flashed to a corporate login screen. The entire restaurant, including David and Chad, turned to look at it. I tapped my phone a 3rd time. My credentials, authenticated via the secure satellite network, flashed onto the screen. The Meridian Holdings corporate dashboard appeared. And on it, in massive 80-point font, was a welcome message. Welcome, MVANCE owner CEO. Oh my God, a woman at a nearby table whispered. He's telling the truth. David's armor was his $2,000 suit. Chad's armor was his father's credit card. My armor was a simple hoodie, a strong Wi-Fi signal, and $1.4 billion in liquid assets. I was now fully suited up, and I was ready to deconstruct. The TV screen changed again at my command. It now showed a picture of David, his official corporate headshot, and next to it his salary, $220,000 a year, and next to that a new blinking red box, status, pending termination. David, I said, Let's talk about your performance. You see, I didn't just buy this chain, I bought it because it was failing. This flagship location, your kingdom, is losing $50,000 a month in inventory, and I couldn't figure out why. So I came here myself as a mystery shopper, or as you so eloquently put it, as street trash. And in just 15 minutes, you and your accomplices have shown me exactly where the rot is. The screen changed again. It was now a split screen. On one side, my face, on the other, Chad's. It was a live feed from the security camera directly above the VIP booth, a camera I had personally upgraded 3 days ago, a camera that recorded audio. "Let's review the tape, shall we?" I said. I tapped my phone. The entire restaurant watched in horrified high-definition silence as Chad Davenport shoved me, as he called me street trash, as he ripped my 40-page audit report in half. We watched as Tiffany ground it under her heel. We watched as David, the GM, approached and immediately sided with the aggressor. We watched and we heard as David lied about the reservation, as he lied about the dress code, as he lied about me being aggressive. And we watched, in glorious, undeniable 1080p, as he ordered his security team to arrest me. "This," I said, as the video played, "is Exhibit A in the criminal complaint I will be filing against Mr. Davenport for assault and destruction of property. And this," I said, as David's lies filled the room, "is Exhibit B in the lawsuit this corporation will be filing against you, David, for gross negligence, conspiracy to defraud, and felony theft." "Theft?" David shrieked, his mind snapping. "I never stole anything." "Didn't you?" I tapped my phone. The screen changed. The video disappeared, replaced by the shredded, destroyed pages of my audit report. Those papers Mr. Davenport so helpfully destroyed, that was my personal audit, the one that proves you have been comping, stealing, over $200,000 in high-end food and liquor to your platinum friends over the last 6 months alone. This isn't a restaurant, David. It's your private club, and you've been funding it by bankrupting my company. I turned to the 2 security guards, who now looked like they were about to be physically ill. "And you too," I said. "You were about to unlawfully detain the owner of this company, on the illegal order of a corrupt manager. You are, at this moment, accessories." I let the weight of that settle. The entire room, the entire staff, the diners, the villains, they were all finally and completely aware of the truth. The hobo was the king. The nobody was the boss, and the man they had all tried to throw out, the man they had all laughed at, was now the judge, the jury, and the executioner, and the trial was about to begin. The corporate dashboard, glowing on the 80-inch screen, was my armor. The live security feed from the camera I'd installed 3 days ago, the one directly above table 7, was my witness, and the entire frozen, silent restaurant was my jury. David, the general manager, was slumped against the bar, his $2,000 suit now looking like a cheap, ill-fitting rental, his face a grotesque mask of sweat and pure, unadulterated terror. The hostess, Sarah, was openly weeping at her station, her shoulders shaking, her sobs the only sound in the cavernous, high-ceilinged room. And the platinum couple, Chad and Tiffany, were trapped in my VIP booth, pale as ghosts, staring at me as if I had just sprouted wings and horns. Tiffany's phone, which had been her weapon of choice, now lay on the table, still live streaming, but she was too terrified to touch it. She was, in real time, broadcasting her own execution, and the execution of everyone around her, to the entire world. This was the deconstruction. This was the moment I presented the receipts. "You see, David," I began, my voice calm and measured, my hero's resume about to be read, not to brag but to educate. "I didn't get here by accident. I wasn't born into this. I started 20 years ago as a busboy in a diner in this very city, scrubbing floors and cleaning toilets, much like the one you probably assumed I belonged in. I learned this business from the ground up. I learned inventory. I learned payroll. I learned that the most valuable asset in any restaurant isn't the wine list, it's the staff, and the most dangerous liability is a corrupt, arrogant, and short-sighted manager. I let that sink in. I was not just an owner, I was an expert. I built a 300-restaurant empire from nothing. I continued, my voice steady, my eyes locked on David. And this group, this flagship, is my latest acquisition. I bought it because it was failing, David. I bought it because I saw men just like you running it into the ground. I read the reviews, dozens of one-star reviews, all from people of color, all telling the same tired, pathetic story. The hostess was rude. The manager looked right through me. They gave our table away. I came here tonight looking like this in my hoodie because I had to see for myself. I wasn't a random hobo. I was a mystery shopper, or, as you so eloquently put it, street trash. And in just 15 minutes, you and your accomplices have shown me exactly where the rot is. You didn't just fail a test, David. You proved my case more spectacularly than I could have ever dreamed. I turned my cold, focused attention to the booth. You, I said to Chad, called me street trash. You called me a hobo. You told me to go to welfare. And then you assaulted me. You physically assaulted me. I pointed to the security feed on the TV, which I had just rewound and was now replaying in glorious, damning 4K slow motion. The shove, the snatching of the papers, the rip. You, Tiffany, I said, mocked me. You broadcast my humiliation for sport. And then you destroyed my property. The video now showed her, grinding her heel into the shredded paper, a sneer on her face. I then turned back to David, the true villain of the piece. And you, I said, my voice dropping. You used my employees, Sarah, to enable their behavior. You used my security team to threaten me. You lied to my face about my own reservation. You lied about a dress code. You lied about me being aggressive. And then in the single dumbest, most catastrophic act of your entire corrupt career, you tried to have me, the owner of your $1.4 billion company, arrested for trespassing. The hard evidence phase began, the avalanche. I tapped my phone. The 80-inch screen above the bar changed. The live feed was replaced by a digital document. It was the shredded, ruined, 40-page audit report that Tiffany had ground her heel into. Or rather, it was the pristine digital original from my secure server. Receipt number 1, I announced. The welfare application you two destroyed. This is the internal fraud and inventory loss audit for this specific location. The one I was reviewing when you interrupted me. Let's look at the executive summary, shall we? I zoomed in. The entire restaurant, every patron, every busboy could read the text. Location: Meridian, Chicago, flagship. Internal audit period. 6 months Q1 Q2, inventory shrinkage, liquor high-end. $147,800 inventory shrinkage, food A5 Wagyu caviar. $82,400 unauthorized platinum COMPS MGR. D. Carter. $212,000 total estimated loss, 6 months. $442,200. $442,000, David, I said, my voice echoing in the dead silent room. In 6 months. You weren't managing this restaurant, you were robbing it. You were stealing from me. This isn't a restaurant, it's your personal slush fund. You've been comping, giving away, stealing over 80% of the bills for your platinum member friends like Mr. Davenport here. This isn't a business, it's your private club, and you've been bankrupting my company to fund it. This, I pointed to the shredded, champagne-soaked paper on the floor, was the physical evidence. And you, I looked at Chad, just destroyed evidence in a felony theft investigation. You didn't just rip up papers. You just made yourself an accessory. Chad's face, which had been pale, was now the color of wet ash. He was no longer a bully. He was a co-conspirator. Receipt number 2, I continued. I tapped my phone again. The TV screen changed. It was now Tiffany's live stream playing back, pulled directly from the web. We all watched as she sneered, "OMG, you guys, this random hobo is trying to steal our table, the audacity." We watched her zoom in on my face, mocking me. We watched her cheer as Chad ripped up my papers. "Look at that," her voice chirped. "All his important hobo papers." "This," I said, "is Exhibit A in my personal lawsuit. A 15-minute high-definition, live-streamed record of you, Chad, committing assault and battery. And you, Tiffany, committing defamation, slander, and incitement. You didn't just film this, Tiffany. You produced it. You broadcast it. You and your 50,000 followers who are, I see, still watching are now my star witnesses. Thank you for that." Tiffany let out a small, strangled sound and finally, clumsily, fumbled to end her stream. Too late. The digital footprint was already permanent. "Receipt number 3, I said, my voice relentless. The screen changed again. It was now a text message log. A log I had pulled from the restaurant's own server in the last 5 minutes. It was the conversation between David, the GM, and Sarah, the hostess, from 10 minutes ago when he'd first been alerted to my loitering. "David, GM, I don't care if he has a reservation. Get him out. I'll handle the fallout. Chad tips 50%. Sarah, host, he's not leaving. He's just sitting there. He's starting to make me nervous. He looks dirty." David, GM, then call security. "Tell them he's harassing you. I'll back you up. Just get him out." The hostess, Sarah, who had been weeping, let out a loud, agonized wail. It was all there, the conspiracy. The motive, $50% tips. The lie, tell them he's harassing you. The explicit, classist, and racist bias, he looks dirty. It was a confession in writing. This was the villain's collapse. David, the GM, didn't just look pale. He looked ill. He was clutching the bar, dry heaving, his $2,000 suit jacket stained with sweat. The security guards had backed away, their hands raised, wanting no part of this. They were no longer security. They were just witnesses, and they knew it. And Chad and Tiffany. They were frozen, paralyzed, as they finally understood the scale of the catastrophe they had initiated. They had picked a fight with a billionaire on camera, while he was in the middle of uncovering a massive, multi-million-dollar criminal conspiracy. They hadn't just stolen a table. They had stumbled into the middle of a federal case. I walked over to the VIP booth, the one I had reserved, the one they had stolen. I looked down at the two of them cowering in my seat. "You called me street trash," I said, my voice a quiet, lethal whisper. "You told me I didn't belong. You, in your garish, rented-looking clothes in my restaurant had the audacity to judge me." I looked at Chad. "You tore up my audit, a $442,000 piece of evidence." I looked at Tiffany. "And you ground it into the floor with a heel you probably can't even afford without his credit card." I was done. The deconstruction was over. There was nothing left but the verdict. The deconstruction was complete. The room was a vacuum, all the arrogance and bravado sucked out, leaving only the cold, hard, and undeniable truth glowing on the 80-inch screen. David was hyperventilating against the bar. Sarah was a crumpled heap at the hostess stand. And Chad and Tiffany sat frozen in the VIP booth, two pale, terrified mannequins in a prison of their own making. Their faces, once so full of mockery and derision, were now just empty. They had been exposed, humiliated, and legally implicated in front of the entire restaurant, and thanks to Tiffany's own live stream in front of the world. This was the moment for the final speech. This was the verdict. I walked slowly from the bar, past the other diners who were watching with a kind of reverent, horrified silence, and stood in the open space in front of the VIP booth. I wasn't just speaking to the four of them. I was speaking to the room. I was speaking to everyone who had watched, who had judged, who had said nothing. "This," I said, my voice quiet but carrying, "is what happens when you build a world on assumptions. You," I looked at David, "assumed that a $2,000 suit gave you authority. You," I looked at Chad, "assumed that your father's money made you untouchable. You," I looked at Tiffany, "assumed that your social media following made you a celebrity. And all of you," my gaze swept across the silent, watching diners, "assumed that a black man in a hoodie was street trash. You built a temple to the appearance of wealth, and you forgot to check the foundation." I pointed to the TV where the fraudulent $442,000 loss report was still displayed. "This is the result. This isn't a restaurant, it's a symptom of a disease where you value the look of a person over the content of their character. You bow to bullies like him," I pointed to Chad, "because he looks like he belongs. You enable corrupt, racist, and thieving managers like him," I pointed to David, "because he looks the part. And you harass, assault, and try to arrest a man Because he doesn't. You were all so afraid, I said, my voice filled with a cold pity. You, David, were afraid of a bad review from a platinum member. You, Sarah, were afraid of your corrupt boss. You, I looked at the other diners, were afraid to stand up, afraid to say, "This is wrong." You were all so afraid of the bully, you didn't realize you were enabling the thief. You didn't realize you were complicit in the crime. I let that sink in. The entire room flinched. They were complicit. Their silence had been their vote. Well, I said, this is my house, and in my house we don't enable, we don't look the other way. In my house we stand up, and in my house we take out the trash. This was the sentence, the takedown. I delivered it to each of them one by one. David, I said. The general manager, a 45-year-old man, was openly weeping, snot and tears running down his face. You are terminated for cause effective immediately. For cause means no severance. For cause means no golden parachute. It means you will be lucky if you can get a job as a night manager at a motel. But that's not all. My legal team, the real one, the one that doesn't just threaten lawsuits but wins them, will be in touch on Monday. We will be prosecuting you personally for felony theft and conspiracy to defraud, to the absolute, full extent of the law. I am not just firing you, David. I am ruining you. I am taking back every single one of the $442,000 you stole from me, and I am going to make sure you never, ever work in this industry again. David let out a choked, animal sound and slid down the bar, collapsing onto a stool, his head in his hands. I turned to the hostess stand. Sarah. She looked up, her face a mess of terror. You're fired. Your complicity, your lies, your explicit bias. He looks dirty. It's all documented. You will be named as a co-conspirator in David's indictment. You have 30 seconds to get your personal items and get out of my building. I turned to the two security guards who were standing near the door, pale and sweating. You too, I commanded. You're fired, both of you. You were about to unlawfully detain the owner of this company on the illegal order of a corrupt manager. You didn't protect this restaurant, you threatened it. Give your badges to that agent. I pointed to one of my own corporate security team who had come in. Get out of my building. Finally, I turned to the booth, to Chad and Tiffany. They were trapped, cowering in the corner, their faces a mask of pure reptilian fear. And you too, I said, the platinum members. I looked at Chad. You assaulted me, you hit me. I looked at Tiffany. And you filmed it, you celebrated it, you broadcast it. I looked at Chad again. And you destroyed my property. You destroyed a $442,000 fraud report. Chad's voice was a high-pitched, pathetic squeak. I'll pay for it. My father. He'll pay for all of it. It was a joke. It was just a misunderstanding. A joke, I said. You think this is a joke? You're banned, both of you, for life. Not just from this restaurant, from all 300 of my properties across the globe. Your names, your faces, which, thanks to Tiffany, are now globally famous, will be added to our permanent non-admittance list. If you or your trust fund ever try to make a reservation at any of my establishments again, you will be arrested for trespassing. Am I clear? They both nodded, their bodies shaking. And Tiffany, I said, smiling a cold, dead smile. Keep filming, please. The world deserves to see this. The world deserves to see what entitled really looks like. Oh, and Chad, I said as he fumbled to slide out of the booth. Those papers you ripped up, that was the annual fraud report I was compiling. The one I am now, thanks to your public interference, hand-delivering to the IRS and the U.S. Attorney's Office. You didn't just destroy evidence in my case. You just created a brand new federal case against your father's platinum friends and their illegal, off-the-books comps. You didn't just rip up some papers, son. You just destroyed your entire corrupt ecosystem. You're done here. This was the final gavel drop. I watched them, the two of them, the platinum couple, scramble out of my booth. Chad in his haste tripped, falling to his knees on the marble floor. Tiffany, trying to pull him up, just shrieked. It was pathetic. They were no longer royalty. They were just trash. They ran for the exit, a gauntlet of silent, starring, and yes, filming diners. The door slammed shut behind them. I stood there for a moment in the dead-silent million-dollar room. I looked at the cowering, weeping staff. I looked at the stunned diners. I looked at the VIP booth, my booth, now empty. I walked over to a young, terrified busboy who was cowering by the kitchen door, his eyes as wide as saucers. He couldn't have been more than 19. "Son," I said, my voice suddenly calm, all the ice gone. "What's your name?" The boy stammered. "M. Miguel, sir, Mr. Vance, sir." "Miguel," I said, "have you seen David and Sarah? Comped their friends' meals before?" Miguel's eyes darted to the weeping David, then back to me. He was terrified. He nodded, a tiny, jerky motion. "Why, yes, sir, all the time. They told us not to ring them in. They said it was for the house." "Thank you, Miguel," I said. "You're honest, I like that." I looked around the chaotic, ruined, managerless restaurant. "Congratulations, Miguel, you're the new acting manager, as of right now." His jaw dropped. "Es, sir, I'm a busboy." "And I was a busboy," I said. "You're the only person in this room who just told me the truth. You're promoted. Now your first job," I said, pulling out the chair at my table, "is to call the Chicago PD. I'd like to file a formal assault and battery report against Mr. Chad Davenport and tell them to bring a forensics team. I want them to collect every piece of that evidence he destroyed." I sat down at my table, the one I had reserved. I picked up the pristine, unripped menu. "Your second job, Miguel," I said, "is to get me a steak, medium rare, and a bottle of the 98 Cheval Blanc. I'm told it's the best in the house." The steak was, as I'd expected, perfectly cooked. Miguel, the terrified busboy-turned-acting manager, had, in a state of adrenaline-fueled shock, performed flawlessly. The Chicago PD arrived, not with the sirens and lights of a typical disturbance, but with the quiet, grim efficiency of a white-collar crime unit. They didn't just take a report, they took evidence. They photographed the shredded, wine-soaked remnants of my audit report. They took the hard drives from the security office. They took David, the former GM, and Sarah, the former hostess, in for questioning not as witnesses, but as persons of interest in a multi-million-dollar fraud investigation. The systemic takedown was in motion, and it was swift, brutal, and just getting started. The competitors were punished, not just by me, but by the natural, viral, and unforgiving laws of the digital world. Tiffany's live stream, the very weapon she had tried to use to humiliate me, became her own execution. The 15-minute clip of her sneering, of Chad's assault, of David's racist lies, and of my final, devastating deconstruction was screen-recorded by thousands. Before they had even made it to the lobby, Chad and Tiffany were trending, not just in Chicago, globally. The hashtags Meridian Meltdown, Trashy Platinum, and He Owns the Place were exploding. Chad Davenport, as it turned out, wasn't just a trust fund kid. He was a senior vice president at his father's investment firm. By the time he woke up the next morning, hungover and terrified, the video had been emailed to his entire company, his board of directors, and most critically, their largest institutional clients. He was fired by 10:00 a.m., not for assault but for conduct unbecoming, a clause in his contract designed to protect the firm from just this kind of public relations catastrophe. His father, facing an immediate IRS inquiry triggered by my fraud report tip, publicly disowned him. Chad wasn't just cut off, he was erased, a social and financial pariah, his name synonymous with arrogant, racist entitlement. And Tiffany, her 50,000 followers, the ones she had performed for, turned on her with a righteous digital fury. Her brand sponsorships, the diet teas, the cheap jewelry, the designer knockoffs, all pulled their contracts within hours, citing morality clauses. Her career as an influencer was over. Her name a permanent punchline, a global case study in what not to do. She and Chad, the platinum couple, were bound together forever, not in love but in shared, viral infamy. As for my restaurant, the old system was purged. David, the GM, and Sarah, the hostess, were prosecuted. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the text messages and the audit report, They pleaded guilty to felony theft and conspiracy. David, who had stolen over $400,000, was sentenced to 3 years in state prison. Sarah, who had been a complicit accessory, received 5 years of probation and was ordered to pay restitution. The entire Platinum member program, the one that had enabled this entire corrupt ecosystem, was dissolved across all 300 of my restaurants, effective immediately. The message was clear. There would be no more special class of customer. There would only be customers. But the most important ripple effect was the restoration. It wasn't about me, it was about the system. I promoted Miguel, the busboy who had told the truth, to full-time general manager of the Chicago flagship. His first act, to promote 2 other line cooks and a server, all of whom, he told me, had been complaining about David's racism for years but were too afraid to speak up. The entire corrupt management structure was gone, replaced by the very people it had been oppressing. The help was now in charge. I instituted a new company-wide Dignity First policy across all 300 Meridian locations. The policy was simple. Any employee at any level who is found to have engaged in any form of discrimination, racist, classist, sexist, or otherwise, would be terminated immediately. No warnings, no probation. And a new, anonymous, 24/7 corporate hotline was established, with a $10,000 reward for any employee who provided evidence of a manager violating this code. The Dignity First policy and the story behind it was sent to every major newspaper in the country. We didn't just fix the problem, we monetized the solution. We turned our anti-racist stance into a public relations weapon. And the results, our profits, which had been bleeding, didn't just stabilize, they exploded. The public, it turned out, was starving for a corporation that wasn't just neutral, but was actively, publicly, and viciously anti-racist and anti-classist. Our Dignity First campaign went viral. People didn't just come for the food, they came to support the movement. The Chicago flagship, under Miguel's new, honest, and respectful management, became the single most profitable restaurant in my entire 300-location empire, doubling its revenue in 6 months. They thought I was street trash. They didn't realize I owned the street. They thought I was a nobody in a hoodie. They didn't realize I was the man who signed their paychecks and the paychecks of 10,000 other employees. They thought they could judge me by my cover, and they forgot that the man in the simplest clothes is often the one who wrote the book. Justice isn't just about punishing the bad, it's about empowering the good. And sometimes the best man for the job is the one who's already there, the one you've been overlooking, the one who's just waiting, like Miguel, for a chance to tell the truth. If you believe that dignity is more important than a dress code, if you believe that a person's worth is in their character, not their clothes, like this video and subscribe for more stories where the entitled, the arrogant, and the corrupt finally get exactly what they deserve. Comment below, what was the most satisfying part of this takedown? The firing of the GM, the arrest of Chad, or the promotion of Miguel?